My name is Allison Klein, and I am on the product marketing team for rendering and H360. Today we have Colin Smith covering for John Hutchinson. John had to be on a business trip this week, so Colin Smith is here. He's the product manager of Fusion 360, and he has over 26 years in the software industry, years experience in the software industry, and has been the product manager for Alias, Sketchbook, and Portfolio Wall before joining the Fusion 360 team. And as product manager of Fusion 360, he's responsible for industrial design and visualization workflows. So thanks to Colin for being with us today. And before we get started, I'm just going to go through a couple things, how to ask questions during the webinar. So you'll see this little panel in the right-hand side of your screen. Up at the top or in the middle here, you have a questions panel, and you can type questions in at any time during the webinar, and we will form a list for Colin to respond after during the Q&A session. We'll have 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Q&A, and any questions that we don't get to during the session we'll follow up with after via email. And you can write us also at rendering.community@autodesk.com. This webinar is also being recorded, and we'll be sending you a link to the video within 48 hours. And then before we get started, we'd like to ask that you answer a few questions so we can learn a bit more about why you're here. So I'm going to run a quick poll just to gauge your awareness of rendering and Fusion. First question. Okay, we'll give a few more seconds here for people to finish up answering. All right. And the next question. All right. And then just one more. All right, the last few seconds here. Okay, thanks everyone. So now I am going to turn it over to Colin Smith.
Hi, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Beautiful. Hi everyone, my name is Colin Smith. As Allison said, I'm one of the product managers on the Fusion 360 team. John Hutchinson was unable to make this presentation, unfortunately, and so he's asked me to fill in for him. So I'll do my best in an attempt to do that. What I'm going to walk through with you today is a couple things around rendering in Fusion, and I will also cover how we do assignment of materials and a few of those front-end things. And then I'll go into the actual rendering. I'll talk a little bit about rendering locally and how we do that, and then compare that to what we're doing with cloud rendering, how they are the same and how they're a little bit different, and some of the things you can do. And then after that, I'll leave it open if people have questions. Okay, so I'm in Fusion 360 right now. As you can see, I'm in the render workspace. So we have a number of different workspaces in order to allow you to do different work. Right now, I'm in render. If you're in Sculpt, you'll notice that the Sculpt environment looks somewhat different from the rendering environment, and this was done purposely. If you move between environments, this environment background is all set up purposely to make it easier to do modeling so you can see what you're doing. And in the rendering environment, we want to present the best picture possible of how we reflect the objects in the scene, and so we've changed the environment in this workspace to better reflect that. So for people who are not really familiar with rendering, what we're doing here is we're using a combination of several factors. We're using lighting in the scene, we're using an environment, we're using realistic materials and the geometry in order to create a picture. And we have a couple of different ways of doing that. And what I'll do is I'll show you, I'll talk through a little bit of the render workspace and the different tools you have there to start, and then we'll move on to doing actual rendering. So in the way that all of the different environments in Fusion work is you have this menu bar which has all of the local tools that have to do with this subject matter. And we have setup area here where we have all the different tools are also in the quick menu bar, but they're also below. and you can push them up into the menu bar, but there's so few of them here we don't need to. And same thing for rendering. Your browser here is where all of the organization of your data when you're doing modeling, and you can use the browser in much of the same way that you can when you're doing modeling. You can turn objects visibility on and off by turning them on and off in the browser, and you can also drag materials to objects in the browser as well as you can in the screen, depending on what you're trying to do. So there's the browser. Down below here we have the rendering gallery, and I'll get into a little bit more about this soon, but basically what this does is it shows you a quick way of seeing, I've got the wrong version of Fusion open. Okay, give me a second, I'm going to switch in a minute. This is our dev cut, so there's some things in here that are going to be a little bit different from what you're used to seeing. And I wasn't able to render before. Let's see if it's going to work. If it's going to work, then I will stay in this environment. If not, then I might have to switch back. Just close that, see what's going to happen. So down here is different renderings that have already been created for this data set. So automatically we do background rendering of all the named views. So if your named views are basically the different cameras, we have a top, a front, a right, and a home, which are automatically created when you first save the file, and then we re-render those as necessary. If you create a separate render, they also show up down here. So this is where all your cloud rendering is going to show up down here at the bottom. So let's start with assigning materials, because that's probably the easiest way to begin a project. And what you can do is you open up the appearance window. So we have two different types of materials actually in Fusion. One type is called appearance, which is basically what we use for doing rendering of pictures. And then we have another type called physical materials. And if you go down into setup, you'll see there's another listing for physical materials. And physical materials, the dialog box looks very similar to the one that we have for appearance materials. And sometimes people get them a little mixed up. Basically, the difference is physical materials are really used for simulation purposes. You assign the type of material that this object would be made out of in order to do proper simulation against it, which is different from your appearance. So your appearance, if you want to think about it, is you could have an object that's made of metal, but it's painted red. So the object physical material is what the object is made out of, and the appearance material is what has been applied to the material to make it look in a certain way. Now, in some cases, those are going to be the same material, but we have that distinguishing feature in here so that if you do things in our simulation tool, that you don't have to reassign different materials in order to get different things. If you're doing pictures and you're concerned about the way things look, then you just really need to worry about the appearance materials. Now, having said that, when you open up a file, you will see these semi-polished materials here in this design area. Those are actually the physical materials, they're not appearance materials. So that's what's, sometimes if you're starting on a new design and you open it up, this will be automatically added to your model, and then you go over top of them when you do your appearance materials. So let's look at the appearance material library. Yeah, I see it's not working. Give me 1 second, unfortunately. Oh, I am here. Good. Look at that. Just ignore that completely. There we go. So we're back. So I'm now in the regular cut for Fusion. I'm going to go into appearance. So this is production. If you're using Fusion today, this should look very familiar. This is the production build for Fusion. In your appearance area, you have, it's broken down into several sections, and I'll go over each section pretty quickly here. The apply to tells the software if you want to apply a material that you're assigning to a body or component, or if you're doing it to a face. So obviously, if I'm assigning to a body and I go over the body, I drag it over the body, it assigns it to the entire body. Or a component. So the other thing I can do is I can go and I can drag over a component, and that will assign everything over top of everything that's in that component structure. I can also do that to a body in the component. So if I want to go into this area here and open up the bodies folder, I can assign things to the body directly here. So there's a couple ways of assigning materials. One of them is to drag directly onto the geometry. Another one is to drag directly onto a component, or you can drag directly onto a body. If you're doing faces, however, the only way to do that is really to drag onto the face that you want to do this to. So an example of why you might want to do that is, for instance, maybe this cutout area here on this body, you want that to have a different color, but you don't want to actually go in and chop up the geometry in order to do that. If you do assign to faces, you can assign over top of a face, and it's just assigned to that face. The rest of the body keeps the other color. So it's just another option for how you can assign things to your model. Okay, back into the appearance area. The in this design section are the materials that are currently assigned to this model. So right now I have a paint metallic red that's assigned, and I have a plastic glossy black that's assigned, and I have a paint metallic silver that's assigned. And then I also have this polycarbonate clear material. So those are the only materials that we've assigned into this model right now. And the other ones are the physical materials that are part of the bodies of these. In the library section, this is where you actually get a list of the different types of materials that you can assign. The library section here allows you to choose between the Fusion 360 Appearance Library. There's an old legacy library in here, which is from our old protein material library, that if you've been a long-time user, this is the original libraries of materials that we've had, and we recently switched over to these ones. And then we also have a favorites. So if you want to save certain objects to your favorites, you can do that here, add to favorites, and they'll show up in your favorite category down here. So that's the library, and then inside the library itself we have subcategories in the library to help you find the type of material you're looking for. So if you're looking for a plastic, you can click on plastic, and then there's subcategories in there in order for opaque plastics, textured plastics, translucent plastics, and transparent plastics, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of different ways that you can work with the different kinds of materials. Okay, so once you have assigned a material and it's now in this design, you go through and we can select a material. Let's say we're going to make the back of this object, this fan cover here, chrome. So I can take this object and I can drag it over top, and now that object has been assigned a chrome shader, and the chrome shader shows up here in this design. Once it's been assigned to an object, then you can change its properties. The idea of the library here is that the library is a static set of materials that are available, and that these ones are the ones that are customizable. So once you've assigned it to an object, then you can customize it. And to customize an object, all you need to do is just double-click on the actual material, and it brings up this mini dialog box of some of the functionality that we think is the most common things that you're going to want to change on this type of material. So for instance, in this object, it is the name, so I can change the name of this, and I can call this the fan chrome. Or if it changes color, and some of these they have color headings, if I want to change the color, I can do that. If I want to change the base color of this object, I can do that here. If I want to change the shading of the object, so we have the base color and then the shade from light to dark, and gray to black, I can do that in here by dragging around. And you'll notice that the RGB value for that is also here. So if you know what color you're looking for, you can change that in a couple ways. You can drag and get the color that you want, or you can type in an RGB value. We also have here is the roughness value, which actually controls the reflectivity and the shininess of this particular material. So the more, and I'll try and get a nice highlight on there so we can see what I'm talking about. If I click on here and change the roughness, you can see now that basically what is changing is the slight imperfections on top of the surface that change the normals of the surface, and that changes the highlight. An object that has no roughness, that's completely smooth, is like a mirror. So you can go from something that is completely reflective to not reflective, and you have choices in between there. Now, if those options aren't what you're looking for in a particular that particular type of material, there is an advanced button which opens up a larger dialog, material editor, and that material editor has a lot more choices for it, but there's some redundancy in here too. So the color is here, also the roughness value. If there was a bump or relief, if any kind of cutout, and then there's advanced highlight controls. You can change the highlight, how it reflects off the surface, those kind of things. And again, these ones are also going to be based on the type of material. So different types of materials will have different choices in these parameter spaces that you can change. So I'm going to cancel out of there, and I'm going to delete that. I might as well go through some of the ways that you can see the data in your screen here. So I have a number of choices on each one of these. I can edit, so if I just hit edit, it will come up, or I double click it, it will also come up. I can duplicate it. So this is something you might use in a case where you want something to have share a same base material, but you want to make some slight changes to it in order to affect one or the other. And right now, the way that the system works is that if you assign the same material to several bodies, so for instance, the left and right side of this housing, they have the exact same material. So we link those materials together under one heading so that anything that I apply this black to would have the same, oops, I'll try that again. If I assign this black material to this body, then you notice that it is black also, and because it's not any different from the black that's here, it also links it together under this one shader type. If I duplicate this and get another black and then reassign it to this object, that allows me to share the same base color, which, you know, black is probably not a great example, but it allows me to have the same base color, and then I can do other things like change the roughness of it so that I'm ensuring that I have the right color that matches, but maybe the finish is a little bit different on that one. I can also, let me undo that so we can see. There we go. I can also select objects that this has been applied to. So again, that's handy when you have several objects that have the same material assigned to them. For instance, this red material, I can say select objects that are assigned, and I can see that you get a highlight around the objects in the screen, as well as you have these indicators in the browser that show you, and if you go down inside the browser itself into the bodies folder, you can see that's the body that is for this particular button. Here you can unassign and delete. So if I don't want to have this assigned here anymore to this back fan piece, what I can say is do unassign and delete, and it unassigns it from that object, takes it back to its base object, which is one of these semi-polished, and then it deletes it out of this design. So it doesn't delete it out of the actual library because the library doesn't change, but it just, out of the items that are assigned to this design right now, it gets removed. So I'm going to go and make this that same color red, and now we have several objects that are red, and several objects that are black, and some that are silver. Also, if you find yourself that you've been playing around with materials, you can take a blue here, for instance. I assign this blue to this one, and I decide, no, I want to assign this green. You notice that they automatically overlap each other, so there's not questioning whether you want to do this or not. It's going to do it. If you do that to one of these objects up here, what it's going to do is mass replace those objects. So if I just replace over top of one that's existing, anything that had that assigned to it now gets that new material. So that's the way that you can quickly replace materials in the scene. You might find that you have a situation where now you have several different colors in here that are not assigned to anything. You can do a delete all unused, and anything that's sitting in here that is not being assigned will get deleted from your InDesign section. And I'm going to assign this one over top, and then I'm going to say delete all unused. Now, the only cases where you'll find where you get questioned about doing that kind of thing, swapping out one material for another, is if you have something assigned to a face. So in the case where I take something that's assigned to a face, let me take this red again, and I'll assign it here. If I then take this black and I drag it over top, oh, not in the face, I'll go back to body, and drag it over top of this body, you'll notice what it's saying is that, do I want to remove appearances applied to faces? So I have a face here that has something applied to it. If I drag over top, it replaces at the body level. And I have a choice here because it's going to say, I'm going to basically write over top of this material, do you want to keep it the way it is or do you want to remove it? And in this case, I'm going to remove it because I want it to go back to the normal color. So that's how you basically interact with materials, and you can go through and see the number of different materials. The only thing that might be a little bit different from what I'm not showing here is in the case where you have texture maps assigned. So right now I don't have anything with a texture map. I can show you quickly how to change texture maps in here. And what I'm going to do is, let me find this guy here, and I'm going to take him out of the way. Take the buttons out of the way. Buttons. And that button. What's this guy called? The button holder. Okay, so let's look at the button holder. And I'm going to just change this material on the button holder to something that has an actual texture map assigned to it. So wood is probably a good example of this. A lot of the wood ones have some kind of texture map. You'll also notice there are some things in our metals. They'll have, they're not texture maps, but they have cutouts in them. So you have mesh, for instance. It's not a real mesh. It's done with an alpha channel that blocks out some of it, so you can do that kind of thing. Anything that has either a bump map or a cutout or a normal map that's assigned to it, you can change the way it looks. I'll go into plastic, and let's just go into our textured plastic and grab this and assign it to that. Now you can see in here that there is a texture map assigned to this, and if I go into here, there's a number of things I can change in the editor. So I can change the scale of the texture map from here. I can change the rotation of the texture map from here. I can change the roughness again. That's normal for this type of material. And the reflectance, which is how much reflectivity it's going to get from other objects. The other way to change the texture map is by right-clicking. I'm going to close on this and close this. And I right-click on the actual object and say Texture Map Controls. So if I go into Texture Map Controls, what that allows me to do is to change the way that this texture map is being projected on the surface. So a texture map is basically a 2D image that gets wrapped around a 3D object. And we have a number of different ways of doing that. The system always tries to do what we call automatic, which is pick the best one. You might not like the one that we pick for you. So you can go in and you can change them. So we've selected this one object, and you have a choice between a planar projection, which just takes it one direction and it projects it. You have a choice between a box projection, which is basically taking the same texture map on 6 planes and projecting inwards onto the object. A spherical is the same thing, but it projects inside of a sphere, and a cylindrical is one that projects from a cylinder side and caps on the top and bottom. So you have a number of different choices, and you can go in through here. In the case of a projection map, I can say I want to project this planar, and I give it an axis. I'm going to project down, and you can see how that changes the way that the texture map looks. So just a little note on how you can change things in texture maps. So you just right-click on the object in here and then say Texture Map Controls. That control will actually be moving up into the workspace in the next release. Okay, so let's assume that we are getting to a point with this where we are happy with the way that materials have been assigned. The next thing I'm going to do, I'll turn our buttons back on, and let me go back in. I'm just going to change this back to silver. I'll delete the unused out of here and say close. I'm going to go into the environment area. And the environment area is basically we use for Fusion is a large dome that sits on the outside perimeter of this object. It used to be that you could see it, but I don't think we can anymore. It's a large dome that has a image-based lighting or HDRI image, HDRR image attached to it. And right now we have what we call styles, which are different types of HDRI maps that have been applied to this dome. And you can use the environment to switch between the different types. So we have basically the first few of them here are kind of made up studio lights. So if you imagine a studio, putting an object in a studio and taking pictures, we have cool lights, rim lights, sharp lights, warm lights, soft lights, and grid lights. And they all give you a slightly different effect. And as you move the object in the scene, you can see how it picks up the different types of objects in the scene or that are on the actual image that it's getting its lighting base from. So it's getting reflectivity and it's getting the lighting for the scene based on that. The last two, are the plaza and snowfield, are actually pictures that were done using a sphere on camera to capture, and you can see in the reflections here that you can see that this was done outside, and you've got an outdoor look to the reflections in here. And the last one is a snow field, which was done outside in the snow. So you have a number of different choices for how you want to change this. The exposure here, and maybe I'll go back into Plaza so we get a better look. The exposure here, what exposure does is a little bit mislabeled, but what it's basically doing, it's a multiplier for the total light emission that's coming, or the light that's coming off of the HDRI. So if I crank it up a little bit, then it brightens the scene, and if I crank it down, it darkens the scene reflected in the surface. And the other thing you can do for your environment map is you can rotate it. So this is spinning the dome around on its axis, and you can see how that is moving across the object. So it's really just different ways of changing the highlights on your scene. If you want to make sure you're getting a certain kind of look in your highlight, then you can change the rotation of it and see how it's hitting the surface. So background color, so we have two choices right now for background color. One of them is a preset. So when we created the different environment styles, you'll notice that as you flip between them, that the background color changes automatically from using this From Environment tool. So basically that was a pre-selection that was done by our group here when we implemented them. If you don't like the background color that we've chosen, then you can use From Color, and From Color allows you to click on the swatch and you can have any color you want and change that to your background color. I'm going to leave this background color as is. And then the last two things in this choice are your effects. So you have ground effects, which means that you can have a ground shadow. And as you see the ground shadow here, if I change the rotation, you'll notice that the shadow also changes because the light is projecting from a different source, and that source light gives you those shadows. And the other thing is the ground reflection, so which is currently turned on, but I can turn off if I don't want the ground to be reflected. If I just want this object to look like it's floating in space, I turn off the ground shadow and the ground reflection, and now it's just an object floating in space. Okay. There are camera settings in here, and I'm going to get back to those in a minute, but basically what they allow you to do is change the perspective, the focal length, and then turn on depth of field. And I'll show those in a minute, but that's what is in those two right now. And also we have the ability to put on decals or labels using the decal tool. Okay, so the next section here is rendering. So this is where we start getting into the meat and potatoes here. We have two types of renderers in Fusion. We have a local renderer, which we call a rapid ray tracer, or RRT. If you go on to our Fusion 360 blog, there's been a number of posts around the different rendering we have and how to apply materials and all that kind of thing. For the local renderer, what it's doing is basically taking a screenshot resolution, and it's an interactive ray tracer. So if I turn it on, you can see that it's automatically starting to render the image. And you have a number of different quality settings in here. So this is ray tracing locally. You can do quick, which basically does an approximation of both lights and materials in here, and shadows. So it's really just a way of getting a quick look at see what your materials look like when it's turned on. You'll notice that there's a slight difference between the default rendering type that we use for modeling, which we call OGS, which is, you know, if I move between any of the other scenes, this is the same rendering that you see anywhere in the scene. If I turn this on again and move between quick and normal, this is another level up from the quick setting that gives you a bit better approximation of what the objects are looking at, but it's not a photorealistic image that's being created. It's just a quick render. You'll notice that some of the reflections won't look correct. In some cases, we're getting areas down here where you can see that the refraction is not going deep enough, and some of the interior surfaces in here that should be transparent are not. So really, if you want something that looks photorealistic, you should be using the advanced option. So if I go into advanced, This takes a lot longer to render. As you can see that this very noisy image. In here you have an elapsed time gauge that tells you how long you've been doing at this mode, the iterations and number of times it's doing samplings of this image. And really, if you want something that looks really high quality render, you're going to have to sit and watch it do it, because as soon as I touch something in the screen or move it, it resets. So the way that this local renderer works is just keeps iterating until you're happy, and then you pause it, and then you can take a snapshot. There's a bit of rules of thumb on these. If you're doing something in a scene and it doesn't have transparency, you can get to about 500 iterations, and it's probably going to be pretty good, as long as the noisiness of the materials is gone and you're happy with that look. If you have something with transparency, it's really going to be up in the 1200s is a good place to think about stopping. The more refraction and reflections in the scene, the more objects you have reflecting off of each other. These are all things that help with this calculation. And the longer you can sit this to run, the better the image is going to look. So that's the way we've set it up for local rendering. And if I want to, at some point, if I've left this long enough and I'm happy with it, I can pause this image, and then I can use our capture image tool, which basically does a screen grab. It always does whatever your screen resolution and size is. That's how it works, because it's not doing a background post rendering, it's a background rendering. It has no way of controlling the size and the resolution. It has to follow what's on the screen. So, and currently on my screen is 800 by 324 pixels at a resolution of 72. And I can say OK, and it will give me an option to save this. I'm going to save this as back, and I'm going to put it on my desktop, and I have a number of choices between a PNG, JPEG, or TIFF file. I'm going to leave it as a PNG and hit save. And if I go to my desktop, you can see my image is sitting here, and there's the rendered image as it was when I took the picture. Okay, so I'm going to disable this, and we'll go back into Fusion. So the other option that we have for doing rendering is cloud rendering, and so which is part of the reason that you're all watching. So with the last release, we actually introduced cloud rendering right into the product. Originally, cloud rendering was mostly only visible from the data cards in the project level file. So if I go back into, this is our data panel, if I go into an object here and say open my details in A360, this opens up the project file in our A360 service, and you'll see in here all the different renderings that have been created. And originally when we released Fusion, that what we were doing was that every time you saved a file, it would do a snapshot of all the these rendered views. So the name views, the top, front, right, home, and in my case I have a render 1 and a render 2, but these deep 4 would always get rendered in a thumbnail version in the cloud, so you'd have a rendered version to look at when you went back into these A360 projects. And so if I go into this detail card, I can see there's our LMV version, so I can see this in the web browser. But I can also go down into this rendered utility and see all of the renderings that have been done for this object. And so there are some of the rendered images that were created. And this is, these are all my custom views saved ones. And I can go down into different versions, to previous versions, and see these on my A360 account. Now, so originally when we did Fusion, this was the only way to see the cloud rendering in action, was to come in here and take a look at them after the fact. And we really wanted to give people an option for doing rendering to the cloud directly from Fusion, because there was a couple things that were making it a little difficult. One of them was that you could you didn't really have much control over the way things looked in Fusion 360. versus the cloud rendering version because they were all based on named views. So the only way you could do that is what I've done here, which is I've created a new named view. So if I create a new named view, and I call this render 3, then every time I save this file, all of those cameras get saved and they all get a little thumbnail generated in the cloud to represent that rendered view. And previous to the last release, that was the only way you could do it. And so if I wanted to get several different cloud shots, then I would have to go in here and say update name view. And now if I click through these, I say render 1, there's one view, render 2, there's another view, and render 3, there's a third view. Then those will automatically all get rendered out. And hopefully they turn out okay. And if they don't, you have to come back here and tweak and push them to the cloud. So we didn't think this was a very effective way of doing things. And so what we wanted to do is allow people to render directly to the cloud from their Fusion 360 account. And I have done something to my windows. There we go. That was weird. Anyway, we're back. So what we did is we created this cloud rendering button, and we introduced this rendering gallery. So now we have a way in Fusion to actually kick off a cloud rendering directly from Fusion. So you can set up the object the way you want to see it in Fusion, and then basically do a snapshot and do a cloud render of that snapshot. So if I click on the cloud rendering button, then what that does is it brings up this dialog box. And the dialog box is preset to a custom setting, and it's also based on your screen resolution and size. So we have taken that information, or at least the screen size, so that you can do a quick snapshot. If you like what you see on your screen, do a quick snapshot, and you can quickly send that out to be rendered. So I'll just walk you through a little bit of what your choices here are in this cloud rendering dialog box. So by default, you're set into these custom settings, and you can set the render quality. And right now we have two render qualities, which is one is standard and the other one is final. So similar to how we have the two settings or three settings inside of the local ray tracer, this is sort of the advanced and normal version. So you have normal and advanced is the most photorealistic version you can get. And then you have an exposure, which allows you to change the exposure of the scene. And then you can choose your file format. And if you choose PNG, you can actually have an alpha transparency on that also, so you have a choice there. Your image size is custom because it's based on what we've seen the size of your screen. And we have a custom aspect ratio because that's also based on the size of your screen, and the width and height is also grabbed from your screen information. So, you know, we've set this up so that quickly, if you just wanted a quick cloud render shot of this, you could say, okay, that's based on my screen, the size is what I want. We do have information here about cloud credits. So cloud credits, if you're not familiar with this terminology, are credits that you are assigned when you first buy software from Autodesk. Fusion users get a certain amount. If you have other Fusion products, you can get a certain amount of credits, and you can also purchase credits. And in order to use some of the functionality for the cloud rendering, it will require you to use some of your cloud credits. So in this case, because I'm doing a final render of this, it's going to charge me 2 credits. We have a maximum set in the system that you can't do anything that's over 16 credits, and then how many you have available. In my case, I have unlimited because obviously I work for the company. And then you can tells you here how long it's going to take for this to render, and then you can start rendering. You'll notice that if I start changing some of the information on here, the standard size, the standard render quality of this drops down to 1, and I can change some of the presets, and I can get it down to where I can do previews of this without having to actually pay any cloud credits until I'm happy with it. So let me just kick off this render, and then I'll show you how you can do your own custom setups here. So I'm going to start the rendering. So this is a little bit different from the automatic ones we generate. When we generate them automatically, if you hover over them, you can see that these are, that's not an automated one. Get one here in the back. Okay, so these ones here are, this was V1 of right, so this is the right window, the right camera, the size of the actual image, the format it was done in standard, and the time it took, and then the file size. So these ones don't actually, we don't charge anything for these. These are generated automatically. If you start going in and making your own shots of these things, then that's when cloud credits become active. But I can go in and start doing a render here and change the presets. So by default, we have a number of presets. that are set up based on the type of output you want to do. So if you want to do web output, mobile, print, or video, these are the different preset resolutions that you can use and sizes. And if you change this, by default we set the final. If you change this to preview, so that you want to do a quick view of it, so this will knock it down to the standard quality from the final quality, then a lot of these are going to be free, unless the size is quite a large size. So if you want to look at what this object is going to look like in a mobile size, 960 by 640, you can start the rendering and there's no cloud credits required. And then when you go back and take a look at it, once you get it to a point that you're happy with it, you can either leave it at that size or you can increase the size, increase the quality, and then you'll need cloud credits to do that. So let me see here is happening down in the gallery is every time I add a new rendering, it is showing me how that's changing. And eventually this one will, the rendering progress bar will be finished, and then I'll be able to see the object in the rendering. And then what I'll do is let me go into one of these existing custom views. And you have several options when you actually get into here too. So once I click on one of these objects, you can see I open up a separate window. And this is showing me the actual large version of this image. It's not a great image. Let me grab a nicer one. That's a better image. So there's a nicer version of that same image. I have some choices here. If I actually want to re-render this image again, so I want to do it from maybe a standard to a final, all that information has been captured in the camera information, and the system can just re-render it without you having to actually have Fusion open. So this is one of the benefits of being in the cloud, is that if I'm using this locally, I can obviously render to the cloud. But also if I go into these data cards and open them up in Fusion 360, if you had other people in the team who are shared on a project, and those team members wanted to do renderings or re-render an existing object or look at images, they don't have to have Fusion open to do that. And they can go into these rendered images, select a rendered image that they like, and they have a number of options for doing a re-render of this if they want to, so they can re-render it. They can render it as a turntable. They can download the image. There's a number of different things you can do in order to see this object or adjust the exposure or delete the image. So there's some tools that are available to people if they don't even have Fusion open. So we have that option. Let's close this. But locally, I have those same options. So if I want to re-render this, I can. If I wanted to do a turntable, so we have an object option here to do this as a turntable, I can set this as standard. And I'm going to knock down the this to 6 frames, and I can do 6 frames web, and I'm going to start rendering, and that will do a turntable animation of this object for us. And that again will show up down here in the gallery. And I have an option for deleting it, or if I want to download it locally, I can say download it to my desktop from the cloud, and then it will show up here. There it is right there. So a number of options with using the cloud. So, we've set this up in a way so that you have options as to how you want to use your resources. If you don't mind sitting, letting your computer chug through a render locally, you can get some great shots. You don't have as much control over the resolution or the size as you do if you go outside into the cloud. That's going to be temporary. We are going to be introducing background rendering in Fusion so that you can render to the background of your computer and allow your computer resources to render out any size you need without having to obviously use the cloud. So that will be an option. But we want to give people options for be able to use either cloud rendering or to use their machine to do rendering. We also will be allowing, setting up some functionality here to allow you to save renderings you do on your desktop directly into the gallery. So when you get into the gallery, one of the other things you can do is, if you click on, go back in here, one of the other options you have is you can share these items directly into You can embed them. You can email them to other people. We're going to be adding functionality here that you can actually post it to the Fusion 360 gallery too. So if you've ever seen the Fusion 360 gallery, we have a gallery set up so that people can share their projects with other people. And if I go into here quickly, go into the gallery. And so we'll be setting it up so that if you have a gallery account set up here, that you can push your renderings directly into the gallery and share them with other users. And also, a little bit further down the line, you'll be able to share them with other people in your project. Okay, I think I am at the limit here. I'm not sure if Allison, I think we're pretty close to the time. Wanted to give some people a chance to ask questions if they wanted to.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. Yeah, we have a few questions here. So I'll just read off the first one.
Okay.
Someone's asking, how can I use my own HDRIs?
So right now you can't. Right now it's preset. However, that functionality is coming. We have probably within the next 2 releases, you're going to see some major functionality change in the software where we're going to be allowing people to put in their own HDRI images. We're going to be allowing people to do to set up their own backgrounds, to do back plates. There's a lot of functionality that's coming, but that currently isn't available in this current release. But we have a release coming up at the end of May that will include this new functionality that I was speaking about before, where you can render the cloud. We're also going to be, just as a side note, introducing a new way to absorb materials. So right now, materials come static with the software, and you can't add, it's not easy to add materials. We had another way of doing it, but a lot of our customers couldn't find a way to do it. And so what we've allowed now is this new show downloadable materials. So if I go into, I find one where they're available. There we go. So you notice that I've got this check mark now in the appearance library. We have an area where I can actually download different types of materials. So as we add more materials to the materials library that sits in the cloud, if you want to have access to these different types of materials, you can click on them and they'll download directly. And now once it's downloaded, I can actually use it in my workspace. So that's some new functionality that's coming.
Great, thank you. And then we have a couple more questions here. Someone else is asking, what about backgrounds like a lawn or a wall?
Yep, so again, what we call backgrounds or back plates. So the ability to bring in an image and use it as a back plate and try and get the object to make it look like it's sitting in a certain scene. That functionality is coming. And it's one of the things that's on our priority back list. So within the next couple of releases, you should be seeing that functionality come.
Great. And then someone else says, how does Fusion Cam compare to Autodesk Cam?
How does Fusion Cam compare to Autodesk Cam? Oh, so like computer-aided machining? Well, in some ways they're very much the same. In some ways they're different. The CAM functionality that we have in Fusion is based on HSM Works, and we've also purchased Delcam and a number of other CAM type software. I'm not a CAM expert by any means, but we do have a lot of different CAM options if you want to use Autodesk options. If you want to use Fusion's CAM, closeness. You'll notice when you're using Fusion 360 and you go into one of our options is CAM, and we have all these tools for doing 3-axis milling, and part of that is all part of HSM Works. If you're familiar with that product that used to be for SolidWorks, that functionality is available here. It's pretty, from what I understand, again, not being an expert in CAM, it's a pretty decent set of tools.
Okay, great. And then someone's asking, is the local renderer using the GPU or CPU?
It uses it's a CPU renderer. So there's 2 types of renderers, right? So the renderer that you're looking at right now, that's when I'm not engaging the renderer, is using the GPU. That's using my graphics card, similar to how gaming works. Once I engage this renderer, it's using CPU. So it's using software in order to create this, but the software is interactive software. It's not a background process.
Okay, great. And I think that's all the questions we have for today. Thanks so much for a great presentation, Colin. And thanks to everyone who attended. Please let us know if you have any follow-up questions. You can send us questions at rendering.community@autodesk.com. And let me just switch the screen over to myself again. So here we have a couple resources. We have our A360 rendering website, which is at autodesk360.com. The Fusion website can be found here at fusion360.autodesk.com. And we'll follow up via email with helpful links to our forums, other tutorial videos, other good resources like that. And then here again is the email that you can send any follow-up questions to.
You can also go to, if you go into the Fusion 360 forum, there's an area there called the Idea Station. I highly recommend, if you have ideas for features for rendering or anything else that involves Fusion, our product management team and our development team goes through that section on a daily basis pretty much. And if you have ideas that get submitted and they are in line with what we want to do or things we haven't thought of, we do incorporate those pretty regularly. The top voted ones get incorporated into our roadmap pretty quickly. So if you have rendering features that you're interested in, submit them on the Idea Station, and we would gladly incorporate them or consider them for future releases.
Great. Yeah, we can send the link in our follow-up email too for that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Great. So thank you, and we're going to have a brief survey launch after I end the webinar, just to get any feedback that anyone has now. So that'll just launch as soon as I end. So thanks again to everyone, and we'll see you next time.